So let's talk about one small optimization for rerolls in Warhammer 40k that can lead to you getting more damage, and a good number of people might be getting wrong, either by not knowing that it exists, or perhaps applying it when it doesn't really make sense. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking lethal hits, sustained hits and devastating wounds, and how you might be able to get a fair few more of them with full rerolls in Warhammer 40k. This one's basically aiming to do a slightly focused deep dive into dealing damage for certain units in 40k, and basically whether or not it makes sense to reroll literally all of your dice that aren't sixes, or just the ones that are fails. I've seen this one come up on a few comments on videos over 10th edition, though there was one particular one in the last video that inspired me to talk about it a bit more, basically talking about Vulcan Hestan's devastating wounds combined with full rerolls to wounds from some assault intercessors, and how sometimes it might be a good idea to reroll successful wound rolls to try and get some more mortal wounds. For some attack profiles it could be interesting, for sustained and lethal hits it can often be a big deal, though crunching the numbers it might be a little bit less impactful than you might expect for devastating wounds. Let's talk about the different scenarios, and when it might make sense to try and reroll everything, and when it probably doesn't and it makes more sense to reroll just your misses. Having the option to fully reroll dice in Warhammer 40k is a bit more well-rounded and flexible than it's been at times in the game's past. As it goes, it's pretty common to be able to reroll all hits or wounds. Various units can get it either with stratagems, datasheet rules, or more. Say there's Oath of Moment for Space Marines to allow you to reroll all hit rolls. Beast Snagger Boys attacking vehicles, they'll be able to reroll all hits, or you might have Chaos Legionaries or Assault Intercessors getting some full rerolls to wound on the go if they're in melee against something or an objective. In past editions of 40k, the rules tended to be written a little bit differently, basically saying that you can only reroll failed hit rolls and wound rolls, so if you'd actually hit something, you wouldn't be able to choose to reroll that with one of these rules, making you a little bit more limited in player choice. And in the past it also had some odd interactions with modifiers. There was a time where, say you were shooting something with stealth, your unit hitting on a 3+ would be hitting on a 4+, but you wouldn't be able to reroll the 3s as they were hits before modifiers. That always felt like a fairly dumb situation to me. I think partly to get around that, Games Workshop just said that you can reroll anything that you want to instead of just missed hits or failed wounds. And in 10th edition that's particularly interesting given that there's a fair few things that trigger on critical hits or wounds, most commonly sustained hits, lethal hits or devastating wounds, which could all be interesting to fish for in the right circumstances, provided their benefit is powerful enough. Sustained hits is probably the most simple to visualise math-wise, nice and straightforward and only dependent on how good the sustained hits characteristic is and how well your model can hit, and not worrying about wound rolls or saving throws after that. Sometimes it can be an absolute no-brainer to try and fish for the sixes. One fairly common example is the Blood Angel Smash Captain with the Rage-Fueled Warrior enhancement. That gives him a single turn of sustained hits 3 in close combat, and he hits on a 2+ anyway, so most rerolls are still going to hit. If you use Oath of Moment on your target, then it makes sense to reroll everything that isn't a 6. If you only reroll ones to hit, then you average around 14 hits in total, 7 regular hits and just under 2 6s, with every 6 effectively netting you 4 hits. So it makes sense to just reroll everything that isn't a 6. That means that you up your 6 counts to just under 3 on average. You get fewer regular hits, but that's a price that's well worth paying, and it means that this guy will average 16 hits rather than 14 if you choose to fish for those 6s and reroll everything but. It's not a spectacular damage increase from 14 to 16, but it's enough that it's worth it, even if it will be rather swingy depending on the actual number of 6s that you wind up with. It certainly could disappoint, though you could roll a whole ton and absolutely annihilate his targets. One way of visualising it is stacking up the amount of hits that you'd get per dice roll. So effectively here's what that Smash Captain gets with the sustained hits 3 on the go. A huge amount of value stacked on those 6s, and you can sort of think of a reroll as trading out one of those single hits that you might get on a 2 through 5, and then swapping it out to the average amount of hits that you'd expect on this chart. You can basically add all the hits here together and then divide by 6. So say if this guy rolled a 4, it makes sense to try and reroll it, as you've got 1 hit for definite there. Though if you reroll, on average you get 1.3 hits back. It should be a solid improvement, and obviously you'd reroll any 1s as well. On less dramatic examples though, it's certainly not always worth it. Here we have a Beast Snagger Boy making attack against an enemy monster. In Warhorde you get sustained hits, so 2 hits for every 6. And if there's not a beast boss around, he only hits on a 3+, not a 2+. Obviously you'll reroll the 1s and 2s, but for this one it doesn't make sense to reroll the 3 through 5, as you basically swap out a guaranteed 1 hit for an average of 0.83. Basically the advantage of these sustained hits is outweighed by the chance that you might get nothing on 2 rolls. Sometimes the math might be perfectly balanced, and basically it doesn't really matter too much by the numbers whether you re-roll those mid results or not. If your unit has sustained hits 1 when hitting on a 2+, like that same Beast Snagger Boy unit, if they're led by a beast boss, you're pretty much equally likely to improve by 1 hit on a 6, or drop by 1 hit if you roll a 1. And the same is true if, say, you're an Necron Tesla or Immortal, rerolling all hits in Canoptech Court or something. Immortals get sustained hits too with their Tesla weapons, but they only hit on a 3+, so gaining a potential 2 extra hits from rolling that 6 is evenly stacked against rolling the 1 and 2 and losing the 1 hit that you had before. Basically, for these examples, it doesn't really matter if you choose to reroll the mid results, provided you reroll the misses. Bigger sustained hits numbers and better ballistic skill or weapon skill make it more worthwhile though. If you're hitting on a 2+ and you had sustained hits too, then between those two it would be worth it. Some units can also gain critical hits on a 5+ as well. Say for this one, going with Beast Snagger Boys, a Beast Boss, and then using Warhorde with the stratagem to make them critical hit on a 5+. That basically means that there's 2 results that improve you by getting 1 extra hit with them, and then there's just the one that makes you drop down. So for this example, with the Beast Boss and their mob using this stratagem, it does now make sense to reroll those 2s, 3s and 4s. It's not going to make an enormous amount of damage difference, but every little helps. Before we move on to lethal hits and devastating wounds, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, objectivemarkers.com. They're a UK based maker of some faction themed objective markers that work for 40k. They're shipped to plenty of places around the world. These objectives are fairly common accessories, a flat disc with a 40mm circle in the middle and a 3-inch scoring zone around them, so you can clearly see which units are on the objectives and which aren't. Their particular take on them is to have them made of clear acrylic so you can see the gaming surface below them, maybe making things a bit more immersive, and then adding a bit of faction specific theme for the design upon them. I do feel like they look rather smart. They have a generic faction agnostic one with a channel merch Auspex design. Any sales of that one help to support the channel. Their typical sets are £30 or $42 for 6 of them. I've got lots and lots of designs beyond that, ones that could work well for Chaos Greenskins, various different flavours of your Power Armoured chapters out there, and some fairly nice new ones for your Space Elves or the Greater Good. They've got a few other things on their site, including some brewing terrain bases too, might be useful to some people there. Check them out in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their range though, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Overall, basically for sustained hits, you usually either need to be hitting on a 2+ with sustained 2, have critical hits on a 5+, or have an even higher sustained roll. It's maybe a little niche for which ones you want to fully reroll, though potentially for lethal hits it can be a bit more high yield against the right targets. Again, it's going to be more effective if you're hitting on a 2+ anyway, as you've got more chance of re-rolling missed hits into just another normal hit if you don't get your 6. One example where it could be worth it could be some Hellblasters standing stationary in Dark Angels with Oath of Moment and a Primaris Lieutenant and taking aim at something tough. That'll give you the combo of lethals hitting on a 2+ and wounding on a 5+, and also having 4 rerolls. For visualising this one, it's more helpful to think about the amount of converted wounds that you get. So each of the hits from 2 through to 5 essentially represents a third of a wound, as you're wounded on a 5+, so 2/3 of the time that the hit that you get from that shot isn't actually going to convert, making the lethal hit basically 3 times more valuable than a regular hit. For this particular example, the triple value of the 6 outweighs not getting your 1/3 of a wound by rolling a 1, and it maths out that for hit rolls of 2 through to 5, rerolling those means that you're converting essentially 0.33 wounds into 0.39, so on average it does make sense to reroll them all, though the effect isn't dramatic. I bear in mind though that for a more normal situation, with the Hellblasters moving around and hitting on a 3+, it then becomes kind of equivocal once more. You can reroll the 3s, 4s and 5s, but you'd expect a fairly even amount of damage to be gained out of them, as opposed to expecting benefits. For the ones where it does make a fairly solid difference though, is anything where your unit's wounding on a 6. In that case, it's absolutely going to be worth fishing for those lethal hits, as the tiny 1/6 of a chance to wound for the other hits just really pales into comparison versus getting that flat auto wound. Rerolling the 3s, 4s and 5s here basically convert 0.17 expected wounds to 0.25, as you both have the chance to auto wound and then also roll a similar result and wound the regular way. It's at least a relatively good damage buff there. Compared with just rerolling the misses, you gain something like an extra 16% or so. Basically, the maths often tips in its favour whenever you get some sort of double stacking special rule. Black Templar Sword Brethren are another quite nice example. You can get reroll all hit rolls from the Castellan, and then critical hits on a 5+ to auto wound with the lethal hits from the Marshal. And that's typically going to mean that against tough stuff that you'd be wounding on a 5+, say a toughness 10 Gladiator Lancer or a Land Raider or something, then it easily makes sense to reroll everything. And certain Death Guard Plague Marine combos that can get 4 rerolls with a stratagem would also love it. You've got the potential for critical hits on a 5+ there, with lethal and sustained hits between a Biologist Putrefier and a Malignant Plaguecaster. Whenever you're getting sustained and lethal hits at the same time and you're hitting at least fairly reasonably before, there's a good chance that it's probably going to be more worth it, though more so if the lethal hits matter, Say Azrael leading a squad of Inner Circle companions could be another good example there. Azrael gives them sustained hits, the Inner Circle companions already have lethal hits from their melee weapon rules, and if you have Oath of Moment against something like a Toughness 10 vehicle, the combined effect of both the extra sustained hits and the regular lethal hits makes those 6s super valuable. And again, for this one, if you've got 4 rerolls, you want to reroll those 3s, 4s and 5s. Then finally for the third of the 3, we come to the Devastating Wounds, and these combo quite powerfully with 4 wound rerolls, and it's particularly nice if they're wounding on a 5+ already, as it means that you'll likely be rerolling quite a lot of the dice with the 1s through 4s, and then out of the converted hits there's going to be a high ratio of Devastating Wounds there, so plenty of mortal wounds going straight through any armor saves. As usual, it's a no-brainer to reroll every fails, that's what you'd be doing with every unit anyway, but does it make sense to reroll successes here or not? Whether or not this one makes a difference both depends on the chance of the successful wound and the enemy's saving throws after anything like AP, cover and all other modifiers. One thing that can tip the math a bit is that a fair few devastating wound weapons have a fair bit of AP anyway, and because the enemy is quite likely to fail saves against them in the first place, they're often not worth the reroll. One common example could be a Chaos Lord with a Demon Hammer. He's leading a squad of Legionaries, so that means that you have a melee powerhouse with AP -2 and rerolling all wound rolls against things on objectives, so it might be a unit that you'd have the choice with from time to time. For these examples, I'm going to leave Dark Pacts and his big go turn on the side and just focus on the base stats. If he's attacking intercessors, then that means that he'd be wounding on a 2+ as he's strength 8. The Demon Hammer's damage 2, and with the AP -2 it means that you're converting that failed save 2/3 of the time. So on average, rolls 2 through 5 all get around 1.33 damage, where the big 6 gets 2 mortal wounds. For this one, despite having really quite a good wound roll, it's not usually going to make sense to reroll all the successes, as against a 3+ save, despite getting a few more mortal wounds, you would have been better off just sticking with making the enemy take those saves. If you reroll one of those average damage 1.33 results, you actually convert it down to 1.22, due to the chance of you converting some of your successful wounds to 1s. It actually seems that for any AP2 damage attacks like this, such as say the Chaos Lord or Vulcan Airstorm, unless you have something that's got an unusual target or is buffed like a special rule like Armor of Contempt, most normal targets are going to be basically the same or worse for rerolling all the wound rolls. This example here feels like it's a fairly ideal target on paper, going against something that pushes the save up to a 4+, so either a 2+ enemy armor save or a 4+ invulnerable. For this one, your rolls of 2 through 5 all average 1 damage after the coin flip chance of making the save. The 6 gets you the 2 damage, so rerolling all the normal results basically has an even chance of making your damage better or worse, as you lose 1 damage if you roll a 1, but gain 1 if you roll a 6. It means that to actually make 4 on fishing for devastating wounds worth it with an AP -2 attack, you generally need something unusual to be going on. Something like a super rare 3+ invulnerable save, Armor of Contempt on a 2+ save target, or maybe an anti-keyword rule that means that your devastating wounds go off a bit more reliably. I guess potentially preventing an enemy command point reroll if it's going to be super important could be one more argument, as they'll be able to do that against normal attacks but not the devastating wounds. For most normal targets though, it's just not going to be worth it. And bear in mind that all this math gets drastically worse if you have a worse wound roll as well. A 3+ to wounds, say attacking some Terminators with this guy, is going to be worse than a 2+. Though if you look at the targets on the other end of the extreme, against a Land Raider, ignoring any Dark Pacts, they get the 2 mortal wounds damage on the roll of a 6, and a 50-50 chance to get 2 damage on the roll of a 5, everything else being a fail. Obviously you reroll 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s, and that hopefully will gain you a bunch more devastating wounds and regular wounds, but it doesn't really make sense to reroll the 5s for this one, as you basically convert an average of 1 wound from that into an average of 0.5 wounds, just due to the odds-on chance to convert your successful wound roll into a fail. The devastating wound math does get a bit better with lower AP weapons though. Maybe one good example could be a Salamander's Aggressor in the Firestorm detachment. This guy will have twin-linked Flamestorm gauntlets at strength 5 due to the detachment. They're AP -1 against the closest target, and you can use a 2 command point stratagem for devastating wounds. If you hit, say, an enemy Space Marine, which is a pretty reasonable target with low toughness but high saves, after the AP you get around about 0.5 damage per regular wound roll, and then 1 damage per dev wound. And for this one, it still means that you're coming out worse if you reroll those successes. On the dice that you could roll, you've got the 1 chance to gain an extra 0.5 wounds with the dev wound, and then 2 chances to lose the 0.5 wounds with the 1 and 2. So again, it's actively harmful to try and be clever and reroll successful hits here against a 3+ save that you're wounding on a 3+. Even if you happen to be wounding some enemy Space Marines on a 2+, it's still not going to be quite worth the rerolls that would come out even, and it means that if you're firing with AP -1 weapons that are rerolling all wounds for devastating wounds, then in general it's only going to be the 2+ save targets you'd really want to reroll everything, and even then you'd really want to be wounding on a 2+. Again, that's going to be massively rare, so the best chance to have it worth fishing for devastating wounds is with AP0 weapons, or perhaps AP1 weapons that get some cover against them. Say returning to the Salamander's Firestorm aggressor with his Strength 5 attacks in Firestorm. If he's shooting at a target that isn't the closest target, he doesn't get the boosted AP. Again though, still if he's firing against an enemy Chaos Space Marine, it still has you coming out even as to whether or not you re-roll those successful wound rolls. The 1s and 2s balance out the extra damage of the 6. Again for this one, you're still going to need some good wound rolls or high saves to justify. You're only really going to be gaining damage against 3+ save targets if you're wounding them on a 2+, or against 2+ save targets that you're wounding on a 3+ or better. It could certainly happen from time to time. Perhaps some Twin Assault Cannons could be a good example. Against things like Terminators or Sisters of Battle, it's going to make sense to fish for those 6s, though I feel like there aren't really loads of other examples out there in Warhammer 40k. Overall, it was certainly fun to look into the math of that for a video. Feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you use any combos or units that this could relate to? Overall, it feels like for sustained hits, if you're hitting on a 2+, then you either need sustained hits 2 or sustained hits 1 on a 5+ to actually get some benefits from re-rolling successes. For lethal hits, if you're wounding on a 5+, you'd normally need to be hitting on a 2+ to make gains, though if you're wounding on a 6, then it basically always makes sense to re-rolls to try and fish for those lethals. And between sustained and lethal hits, if you've got some sort of critical hits on 5s, or combo both lethal and sustained hits, then it can tip the math in the favour of full re-rolls if you have them. For devastating wounds, there's a few less cases than I might have expected where it makes sense to fully reroll. I was expecting the AP-2 one to be really quite niche, but looks like it often needs to be wounding on a 2+ against an enemy with a 2+ save or a good invulnerable save, and then also have something else going on like Armour of Contempt or some other slightly unusual rules reason to go for it. For AP-1, it looks like the only one that makes a difference is wounding a 2+ save on a 2+. I feel like there aren't so many units out there you'd be able to do that with devastating wounds and all the things applying to it, whereas AP0 has a few more targets where it makes sense. 3+ save units you're wounding on a 2+, or 2+ save units that you're wounding on a 3. A lot of the time with devastating wounds though, it's just going to make sense to make your opponent take those saves as opposed to trying to fish for more mortals. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this, and check out the video sponsor in objectivemarkers.com if you'd like to take a look over their shiny objective marker designs. They've got plenty of ones for different factions, and also those channel merch ones with the Auspex style design. Check back here for more Warhammer 40k videos coming out just about every day, and if you'd like to support the channel and help keep the videos coming, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that makes sense to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.